eternal life. He chose poorly.
Welcome, Bruchim Abim. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. You found Beit Virtuali. Let's stir up a little Torah together, starting with He chose poorly. With the added visuals, the scene in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where the archaeologist of questionable political alliances drinks from a cup, clearly not that of a Judean craftsman. This is an understatement. He chose poorly. This could probably be posited as an underlying theme in all Indiana Jones movies. Although in our universal favorite, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the choosing poorly was probably the script in the first place. Alas, not all can be winners. Yet it makes sense that the Indiana Jones franchise would delve constantly and consistently into our theme this week, reward and punishment theology. From the first film in the franchise with a whippersnapper-esque 39-year-old Harrison Ford, the movies took theology, well, most specifically a Hollywood version of Christianity, at face value. The Holy Grail was real and not a metaphor. The power of the Ark of the Covenant was mystical rather than cultural, and birds could be called upon by an umbrella to defeat certain groups of Germans in the Second World War that I've mentioned by name will ensure that no one sees this video. Actually, you wouldn't believe the words that I cannot say, but that's another video for another day. Anyway, the complaints in later movies of implausibility more than anything just means we forgot the wild implausibility of pretty much every other scene in the first movies. We just liked them more and watched them in a time where 30,000 or so hypercritical reaction videos weren't waiting for you online to tell you how you should feel about everything you watch. But I digress, as that's actually next week's video. The Bible of Indiana Jones is clearly one where the good guys are the good guys, the bad guys are the bad guys, and all will be revealed to be in one camp or the other by the end when all the bad guys get their divine punishment. It's great for entertainment because we can concentrate on the amazing stunts and not have to worry so much about the moral ambiguity, or what we once called entertainment. I'm not saying that that should be entertainment, I'm just saying. It's when you start pulling this reward and punishment theology into your everyday life or contemporary religion, however, that things get a little complicated. I think I personally first became aware of this when, as a student rabbi at the house of our then rabbinical school's spiritual director, was asked to lead the Birkat HaMazon, or the blessings of the meal. As I neared the end, singing as fast as I could, as one does in a speed race through the coda that begins with Yiruat Hashem, fear the eternal, the rabbi stopped me right before I could finish. As this was my second year in rabbinical school and my fast Hebrew still had a long way to go and way too many errors, I thought that he stopped me to correct an error. Well, I was an error. Translate this, he said, pointing at the passage I had just begun to chant. Now, I had the great fortune of using a bencher that had only Hebrew, so at that time, panic set in quickly, especially as a half dozen more experienced students looked at me with a mixture of pity and schadenfreude. Gulp. Okay, I don't have a recording of this incident, but I'm certain that it started with so this is a recreation.
Okay, let's see. Na'ar hayiti gam zakanti. So that's, I was young and also old. Velo ra'iti tzadik ne'ezav. And I have never seen a righteous person. I'm sorry, I don't know what ne'ezav means.
Forsaken, he said. I've never seen a righteous person forsaken. How do you feel about that? This is where the story and my dramatic de-aging comes to an end, because I'm sure my answer was a dramatic, yet uncomfortable shrug. It's not that I never thought of such things, simply that I separated my moral consciousness from the narrative of Jewish ritual. This is what we say, I probably thought. What does it have to do with what I think? Which was, of course, the entire purpose of this teaching moment, in retrospect, a very good one. I'd just chosen to offer blessings on behalf of a table full of rabbinical students and their partners, and I had included in the offered blessings a lot of stuff that I'd never thought of. That is its own lesson and exploration for another day. In this case, this passage was one that our spiritual director could not get past, And he's not alone, although the reasons the different groups skip this passage varies. His was not the only table at which I have sat where that part of the blessing is replaced by yai-da-dai-da-dai for the duration of the moment of reward and punishment. Theology, which reads in an expanded translation something like, "For the length of my life from my youngest days to my oldest, I never saw a righteous person suffer." Around a table in Berlin, Germany. How could any of us utter this phrase other than ironically? The righteous and not righteous both died for their Judaism in droves. Can we really utter something so patently and provably false? And that really is the crux of it. It's not just the end of the Birkat Hamazon. The book of Deuteronomy is filled with this theology, with a special dose of it in Parashat Eikev from the very beginning. If you do obey these rules and observe them carefully, the Eternal, your God, will maintain faithfully for you the covenant that was made on oath with your ancestors. The Eternal will favor you and bless you and multiply you. The Eternal will bless the issue of your womb and the produce of your soil, your new grain and wine and oil, the calving of your herd and the lambing of your flock in the land that the Eternal swore to your ancestors to assign you. You shall be blessed above all other peoples. There shall be no sterile male or female among you or among your livestock? As folks living in the late modern with late modern sensibilities, it's hard to ignore that this wording and the underlying belief system seem to stem from a much more primitive understanding of the universe. Admitted, plenty of faiths, both old and new, posit a religion where correct belief and or correct actions give rise to special dispensation. More clearly stated, before we understood reasons for sterility, such a condition in humans or herd animals represented a life or death existential threat for the tribe. We might find it silly, we might not take it seriously, but at the time it was written, it was life or death serious. Existential threats, by their criticality, get written into sacred morality, and holy books write such phrases as, "If you obey the rules, ... there shall be no sterile male or female among you or among your livestock." Taking a big step back, if you know enough about the environment and anthropology of an ancient people, you can almost predict the specific bullet points for your rewards. Yet this seemingly primitive voice has also caused great consternation for Jewish institution whose theology changed as part of the Haskalah, or the Jewish Enlightenment of the 19th century. Formative voices, such as that of Moses Mendelssohn, commented that we should indeed follow Jewish ritual law. Surprise, surprise, But as well should understand the evolution that brought us to that law. I'm fully on board. If that law was based on superstition, then that law could be questioned. Is reward and punishment theology something that should be equated with superstition? In the eyes of the more radical reformers of the end of the 19th century, the answer was a clear yes. I mean, seriously, does which altar we lay our sacrifices on have any true effect in our life today? Rabbi Michael Myers, in his Response to Modernity, a book documenting the rise, influences, evolution, and trajectory of reform in Judaism, identifies a long list of reasons for liturgical changes that make Reform ritual quite different than Orthodox. Among these are such things as angels, the ingathering of exiles, and the crowd favorite, repetition. He also lists our old friend, reward and punishment, where, for most of the last 100 years, at least in the USA, this could be most obviously seen in the redaction of another passage from Eikev from our prayer books. But in this case, it's also one of the most central paragraphs of traditional Jewish prayer, the Shema, and therefore deserves a little more focus. A couple chapters after our Deuteronomistic sterility promises, we get the Vehaya im Shemoa, and it shall come to be if you hear or obey. In traditional liturgy, the Shema starts out with Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel, followed by our previously, last week studied, Ve'ahavta, you shall love the Eternal your God. That first paragraph is a call to personal responsibility for the mitzvot and the obligation to make the mitzvot a clear and apparent part of everyday life and central to what we pass on to future generations. The entire paragraph grammatically speaks in second person singular. You, as an individual, have these obligations. And then comes the second paragraph, all in second person plural, only to have reappeared in American Reform as an optional reading in the new High Holy Days Maxarim published in the last decade. The offense that caused a century-long absence? Paraphrased, if you obey, the rains will come. If not, the rains won't come. On the one hand, the redaction of this paragraph from everyday prayer is obvious. It reflects a theology, in the words of those 19th century reformers as they comment on ritual and dietary obligations, quote, that fail to impress the modern Jew with a spirit of priestly holiness. Their observance in our days is apt rather to obstruct than to further modern spiritual elevation. Although not directly addressing reward and punishment in this statement, the underlying bias is clear and just as clearly applies. Now, although I profoundly disagree, and indeed the entire so-called Pittsburgh platform of 1885 has been in stages nearly entirely walked back since its publication. I'll go ahead and link to it below so you can read it if you've never seen it. I still must admit understanding the underlying sentiment regarding reward and punishment. Clinically and scientifically, the reasons for personal and bovine sterility are not incorrect temple sacrifice. The same goes for rain. Do we really want to center an ancient understanding of the world in our ritual where so many other aspects of Judaism can easily and comfortably be interpreted into the late modern? And yet this passage, on the surface so problematic, has reappeared in the places where it disappeared. Yes, in the British Reformed Prayer Book, for example, the Vehaya im Shemoah is kind of inserted as optional. At the top of the page where it appears, we read, during the silence, the traditional second and third paragraphs of the Shema may be read. Interesting. And then other pages are offered for optional or additional readings from the Torah. But the words may be read signify that it's optional. And yes, its reappearance in American Reform is also as an alternative or additional reading and only for the High Holy Days. But still, it's there where for 100 years it wasn't. If reward and punishment is so anathema, why not stick to one's convictions? To answer this, let me back out a bit and explain how I always taught this in Reform circles before the text reappeared, in addition to helping folk upset with its reappearance, which there were a few. Much to the annoyance of some, I have no problem critiquing streams of Judaism. Any stream of Judaism. Judaism, in my opinion, comes first, and our movements that institutionalize differences of aesthetic practice and interpretation should come second. Saying, I am X type of Jew first, where we fill in Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, or the various other offshoots, and speak this in a tone of voice that says, we are right, and how dare you take part in the other, means we are coming at our differences via ideology. Meaning, rather than elevating our arguments for the sake of heaven, as is required in Judaism, we are moving our Judaism into an embodiment of distinctly non-Jewish dogma. And yes, all streams are equally guilty of this, just in different ways. My primary critique of Reform Judaism and its redaction of traditional parts of the prayer book was always that it was patronizing and removed interpretation from its central point in Jewish life. How can we wrestle with something we've never seen? Yes, reward and punishment is highly problematic from a scientific standpoint and modern sensibility, but to remove texts based on this conviction assumes two things, one narrow and the other insulting. The first assumption is that the reward and punishment aspect of Vehaya im Shemoah, and quite frankly most of Eikev, is the only possible interpretation of the passage, or at least the primary one. The second and far worse problem is the underlying assumption that Jews, other than the radical leadership elite of the end of the 19th century, were incapable of wrestling with these texts themselves. We know better. You can't handle it. We're going to go ahead and cut it out. Yeah. It's a much harder path. We do have to be taught, as we grow up in Judaism or convert into it, that multiple interpretations are possible, and that these acts of interpretation are central to Jewish existence. In the absence of that, we will indeed read such a passage and walk down the road of fundamentalism, or slam the book shut for its absurdity and walk down the other road, the one that leads away from the synagogue. Forever. Just ask your Jewish friends who haven't been into a synagogue since their bar bat mitzvah why they don't step into a synagogue. The answers are pretty interesting. One of the potential interpretations that returned reward and punishment to Reform was, perhaps obviously with a little contemplation, climate change. Now, paraphrasing slightly, if we pray, and by prayer we mean reverently enter into a dialogue with all around us, the rains will come, as they should. But if we do not, and by do not I mean, to heck with you all, I want mine, at a personal, tribal, or national level, the rains very well may not come. Look at that, a clear and obvious potential interpretation, barely even moved into the realm of allegory to take an anathema passage and have it fit into the social consciousness of the vast majority of Reformed, liberal, progressive Jews. Isn't interpretation amazing? The answer clearly is yes, it is, yet only if it's taught, allowed, modeled, and encouraged. it also requires the understanding that when I encourage interpretation, that I lose control of the narrative and gasp. People might form opinions that are not my opinions. Circling back around to reward and punishment itself, however, I'm going to do what I almost never do. I'm going to encourage us to take these passages literally. Kind of. Literally in Judaism does not mean what it does in fundamentalist interpretations. Rather, it refers to the clear meaning of a text from within Jewish teachings. That means if we interpret reward and punishment through Greek mythology, for example, we're going to return a different literal than that via Judaism. In Greek mythology, the question of who punishes and who rewards is clear. That robed goddess of whichever realm in which we are acting, or that bearded god of the domain in which we've done something cool or made a big mistake, has awoken the need for just compensation. Like in the myth of Arachne, I insult Athena by being a better weaver, and she might turn me into a spider. If I honor Zeus in the right way, the capricious chief god may do anything from answering a prayer, to making me a hero, to raising me to divine status. Yay, Zeus. But don't make him mad, so boo, Zeus. Yet in Jewish teaching, the Eternal has no human characteristics, even though by necessity of being human, speaking a language, we use human attributes as symbol and metaphor. So when we ask, who is rewarding and who is punishing in a theology with no human like who, even our literal quickly becomes complicated. Welcome to Judaism. I think it's likely that the majority of both leaders and average folk in ancient Judah probably took Vehaya im Shemoah both literally and seriously. You know, climate science wasn't much of a thing, yet with the spiritually advanced theology underlying so much of Torah, I have a sneaking suspicion that wise prophets, writers, and editors understood something deeper regarding reward and punishment. Eikev explains that if we follow the rules and regulations of the Eternal, we will be rewarded and blessed. If not, well, not blessed. Many of these rules and regulations may at a literal level appear absurd in the 21st century CE, but during the temple times, from 1000-ish BCE to 70 CE, they provided a basis for life whose success is apparent in the mere existence of Judaism thousands of years later. If you fill in the general rules and regulations with any of these individual, what we might see as absurdities now, and cross that with an understanding of the challenges of the world at that time, and the teaching utility of law in general, perspective changes quickly. Just fill in sacrifice, for example.
If you make sacrifices as I instruct, the blessings will come.
Instant reaction from the crowd today, boo, backwards, stupid ancient people, boo! Yet the sacrificial system can be very much likened to a tax system today, although there is much more to it. Yes, I know, we hate taxes, but we do prefer to drive on roads without holes, and we do prefer to not have to think about where everything goes when we flush our toilets. Yes, boo taxes, but it's slightly more complicated, because yay, infrastructure. In the ancient temple state of the Tanakh, the Levites acted not only as temple functionaries, and pretty rockin' musicians, they were essentially the backbone of the execution of civil law for all society. By the fascinating swirls of history that made the Levites a tribe without land, the sacrificial system, including first fruits, pilgrimages, and temple offerings to close out legal processes, allowed this functioning and functional bureaucratic class to exist as well as feed the landless Levites. Is a legal system to settle disputes necessary for a functioning civil society? I'm not saying any legal system we can look at today in the Western world is perfect, but I would suggest one spent significant time in a nation without the equivalent of a Bill of Rights and the underlying system to support this, and get back to me.
If you make sacrifices in the correct way, you shall be blessed. If not, you shall not be blessed.
Updated, this may read, if you set up a system of just laws, your society will function justly. One might even say that society would be blessed, would be rewarded. And seriously, you can go through every tiny rule or regulation in Eikev and find as effective of an analogy. Was Torah making a case for an eternal temple state, or was it making a comment about the utility of a civil society? Yes, the answer is probably a little bit of both, except the inclusion of that second at any level is pretty amazing. We can as well remove this question from the national or global and make it personal. The Vehaya im Shemoah was formulated in second person plural, yous or y'all instead of you, depending on your idiolect. It makes sense. If we affect things globally, we will be blessed or cursed collectively. In the second verse of Eikev, however, we're already back to you, second person singular. The Eternal will favor you. What makes the inclusion of reward and punishment in the Torah and in our texts and contemplations of today so timely is that through our actions and choices, we are indeed blessed or cursed. I'm not talking about questions of theodicy, why do good things happen to bad people and bad things to good? My statement and standpoint are personal, as well as based on thousands of hours of counseling others as a pastoral therapist. And perhaps it doesn't ease the anger, but other than sociopaths who are unlikely to willingly engage in pastoral therapy, those folks that have risen high by stepping on others are cursed every day of their lives. We may not see it, and we might not get the personal satisfaction of watching the proud fall, but in therapy, I assure you it comes out quickly. The curse doesn't come from a lightning bolt from Zeus, but waking up from nightmares as their unconscious mind tries to reestablish the conscious conscience. And then afterwards, a disproportionate amount of mental energy goes into walling off these cries of despair so that they can look at themselves in the mirror without screaming and function for the next day. I'd love to live more financially comfortably myself. I would, however, never trade where I am now with the mental anguish that I've seen in our acts of self-energetic and emotional punishment that comes from living outside the laws and regulations of a moral and ethical life for personal gain. And then the other side, those souls that have so blessed others and then are lost far too soon. I have no answer or wisdom to the random acts of the universe that remove a loved one from our presence, but I have sat in enough houses with mourners and crafted enough eulogies from the words of weeping loved ones to know how elevated these people were through the life of the one they lost. The kindness and beauty of a life well lived will continue rippling out and affecting generations, even if they have left us far too soon. The iterative question requires some silent thought and meditation, and the willingness to be honest for a few heartbeats. The fun part is something we forget to do, and that's ask ourselves and answer where we are being blessed. And no, that doesn't mean from an external source. It means from how we're living. The name of God means existence. How is our existence part of blessing in our lives? And no, it also doesn't necessarily mean financially. When our thoughts cross over a part of our lives, there will be warmth or there will be a third rail. If there's not a single thing in our lives that is currently giving us blessing, then that's already a powerful message, and contrary to popular current concepts, may actually mean the choices we ourselves have made have been poor choices. We can indeed lay the blame on others, or we can evaluate and contemplate and begin to imagine laying our sacrifices on a different altar. If our minds and our contemplations and meditations cross our partner or children or greater family or a friend or a group of friends and we feel that warmth, name it. I am blessed through my partner. I'm blessed through my friend. I'm blessed. Some of what has brought us these blessings is chance, but love is a verb, and maintaining that blessing requires effort. Effort which is a choice, effort which can be understood in the metaphorical context of, if you follow my laws, you will be rewarded. If we feel warmth when we cross over in our meditations, our vocation or avocation, then we are blessed in a way few are today. So name it, or just as much name the opposite when that is so, if we've hit the third rail. And if our minds cross over all of this without returning a warmth, it probably will have zapped us a few times in those contemplations like a lightning bolt from heaven, so that we see flashes of what is sucking up the blessing. Last night I fell asleep at 4:57 a.m. because I began scrolling through reels at midnight. Addiction's difficult, but it's still our responsibility to acknowledge when the rains are not coming, and the fault lies with the sacrifices we have been offering on the altars of social media, tribalism, anger. Just because something feels backward and part of old books that feel like they should be locked in the back of a dark library does not mean that this is so. There is a more disturbing yet powerful possibility that we are ignoring the most problematic words of our tradition, not because they're inherently problematic, but because tradition is leading us to uncomfortably question how we are serving the laws that govern our lives and the lives to which we are connected. By keeping these texts front and center, we are only encouraging backward thinking if we have not allowed the freedom to contemplate from within an expansive theology. The temples no longer exist, nor the Judaism that relied on them. Yet, every day we make choices regarding which altars deserve our care and sacrifice. And when we put our livelihood, our living energy, on the wrong one, we'll know it. Reward and punishment can manifest pretty clearly and pretty obviously. You might not wish to know it, but the absence of reward will make it clear until we move back to the altar of mutual respect and interconnectivity. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We'll see you next time.
בחצוצרות וקול שופר